Diversity of purpose, when you're in a position of leadership and influence, ought to be a conscious choice. And when you're in human resources, it ought to be one that you make without a shadow of a doubt of hesitation. As a former lawyer, HR and small business consulting is a natural fit for Bryan Driscoll. Whether it's a startup, small or medium-sized business, every owner needs HR compliance, whether they want to admit it or not. Whether they're facing immediate issues or are proactive in addressing them, many people in business don't know where to turn next. So do yourself a favor and get your notepad out, because Driscoll joined me this week to tell me some effective steps that anyone in business can take to protect themselves from an HR compliance standpoint, whether they want to protect themselves, their business, or their employees. Driscoll also provided some interesting and thoughtful perspective on diversity, equity, and inclusion at work, and how all employees can feel heard and valued. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Absolutely. So, Bryan, if you're ready, I'll welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to learn about your career in law and human resources. Great to see you this afternoon. And thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
Absolutely. Now, Bryan, I know that your experience as a lawyer and in human resources sort of gives you a unique perspective on how the world of work works today. So I'm wondering if you can share some of your thoughts in that regard to begin our conversation.
Sure. I think to start, I would say that today's work environment is unlike anything we've seen, certainly in our lifetimes. Many are calling it the Great Resignation. I prefer the phrase the Great Realignment. It's more of a realignment of priorities. Workers are no longer making work the nucleus of their lives, and understandably so. Given the life challenges that we've seen the past 2 years during a global pandemic, many people have realized that there's more to life than work. And now they're looking for opportunities that give them a better balance. In fact, many people have chosen to become their own employer. Here in the US, new business registrations have hit records. But a lot of this is for white-collar workers. The biggest part of the workforce changing jobs recently is in hospitality and other historically low-wage jobs. So what does that tell us? It really is about making a living wage. Look at how the fight for 15 really caught on during the pandemic. With union membership falling, workers are quite literally taking this fight for a living wage to the street. Workers are shifting priorities, but they're also telling employers they need to be paid more and have access to benefits. Healthcare in this country is largely tied to your job, and employers can eliminate that benefit for part-time workers, something businesses do to keep overhead down, increase profits, but that doesn't help them retain employees, nor does it help them get access, help the employees get access to good medical care. What's happening here is that lower wage workers are finding new, better opportunities with better benefits, mostly in the same sectors. While workers like this have leverage, they have to be willing to use it, and it can be a tough decision for many. I know, Kevin, you like sports, so let's use a sports analogy. It's the last play of the game in the Rose Bowl. Our team could kick a 20-yard field goal, tie, force overtime, or we could fall back in the pocket and launch the ball toward the end zone. The decision is ours, because we have the leverage with the ball. Are we willing to use that leverage and go for the win, getting a bump in pay? I mean, there's never a straight answer for that, and I empathize with people in that position. Employers face issues too. They need to develop a competitive advantage to help keep top talent. That could be increased pay, but for many small businesses, that's simply out of their budget. Large corporations, sure, but not small businesses. So what do they do to create that competitive advantage? They can do several things, the two most effective being offer additional benefits where they can and create a more diverse workforce.
Yeah, Brian, you talk about creating a diverse workforce, and as you know, I was born with cerebral palsy, and one of my core passions in life is to make sure that individuals with disabilities have access to employment. So I'm curious to get your perspective on how folks with disabilities become more visible in the workplace, and how we can make sure that we sort of level the playing field for individuals with disabilities so that the employment environment is more equitable.
Sure. So every person has unique talents and abilities. Everyone. If there's something I can use to sum up our conversation today, it's that. According to the CDC, about 1/4 of Americans have a disability. Those people make substantial contributions to their employers. Many companies are beginning to recognize that workers with disabilities have just as much, and in some cases, more value to their organization than other employees. Including diversity in the workplace is the gateway to independence and to solving more diverse problems. The way I like to think about it is this: are companies willing to eliminate one out of every four job applicants simply because they have a disability? I don't think a prudent business owner would ever make that decision. The marketplace is diverse. Why would you want your staff? Why wouldn't you want your staff to be diverse and be able to connect with every corner of the market? Even if you're a business owner whose only goal is to increase profits, even if you don't care about including people with different backgrounds in your business, you should still do so because the data consistently shows your business will be more profitable, achieving your goal. But for too long, workers with a disability have been shunned from work. Changing that atmosphere isn't like a light switch that gets flipped. And I know that's an unsatisfying answer. Making a change to a more inclusive workplace requires constant maintenance, recognition that every employee adds value. Every employee brings something unique to the table. A lot of that starts at the top. CEOs, VPs, managers, they have to set the example for the rest of the organization by embracing that inclusivity and working, sometimes forcefully, to change the culture of the company. Companies also need to address their recruiting and interviewing processes. Taking bias out of the process, making it anonymous, ensures that all groups receive a fair shot at the position. From there, companies need to train. Many businesses just aren't aware of their responsibilities when hiring a disabled person or even engaging with someone with a disability. This isn't meant to prohibit employment, but instead embrace it. Reasonable accommodation, the standard here in the States, is not a cost, but rather an investment in a more diverse workforce. And investing in every employee is the way forward for companies. But it's also societal, Kevin, and I don't mean to say that the only way this changes is by employers and individual employees making a change or forcing a change in their workplace. Disability status may be a protected class, but it's not an accepted class. And until we make progress on that, there will always be broad challenges in the workplace, even though individual companies are making great progress today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you have a background in HR compliance, and that it can certainly filter into that discussion as well. But for you, how do you think businesses can take steps to protect themselves when it comes to HR compliance, when we're looking at protecting the business and protecting their employees as well?
Yeah, every business is unique, and this answer often depends on the unique circumstances a business happens to find itself in at any given moment. At the very least, a startup or new business should ensure that it's meeting federal, state, and local employment laws. As an example, some cities and states have recently started to require in job postings that pay bands are listed. If you're a business owner and you're not aware that that law exists in your area of the country, your business could be subject to fines. There are countless examples like this of little nuances in different areas of the country that businesses need to know. Too many startups, new businesses don't think they need HR or think they can deal with HR, compliance, legal matters on their own. They think they can figure out those laws as they go. They can't. They're running a business. They already have sleepless nights. Why do they want to give themselves more anxiety about whether they're breaking some little known law or regulation? The best way to keep their business compliant and protect themselves and their employees is to avoid any issues from the start. And that's the first step, finding an employee, a contractor, another company, someone you trust to manage this aspect of your business. Recognize you can't do it all and outsource it to the experts. But businesses also must get into the habit of putting human back into human resources. And I think that's some of the realignment we're seeing today. We're all humans and we need to be better at treating each other that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian, I'm curious to get your perspective on how you define equity at work, where all employees feel that they're valued.
So it's interesting that the timing of our conversation today, Kevin, because just yesterday, Brian Flores, the former coach of the Miami Dolphins, filed suit against the NFL alleging discrimination in the workplace. So that shows that even billion-dollar corporations with a mountain of resources at their disposal are having difficulty navigating some of these issues. And that's why a case like this is important, because equity levels the playing field, which is why it often comes along with diversity and inclusion. Together, this ensures every employee feels welcome and included, able to participate in the workplace, and not feeling like there are extra hurdles put in their way or that they have to work extra hard to make the same progress as someone else. Equity is equal opportunity and fair representation, but again, it's not a light switch. It requires a methodical approach and starts with education. Whether a minority race, gender, someone with disabilities, the workplace can be improved by including people of diverse backgrounds and life experiences. Think about business owners should consider questions like, what does this person bring to my team? What unique perspective can they offer that makes our business better? Considering these questions will help companies find the best person for the team, not just the individual role, because we don't work in silos. And that needs to be considered when making a new hire. Again, going back to the whole person, a business is hiring a person, not a machine. Equity also comes through consensus and solidarity, which can be constructed from the bottom up by groups marching together. Again, look at the fight for 15. Not everyone marching for that fight makes under $15 an hour, but they're marching in solidarity, showing empathy and recognition that their colleagues deserve better. The same is true of disabled colleagues. We can embrace each other and rise up together, including demanding better conditions and more inclusion in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for you, words matter and written words matter. And you've had a tremendous level of influence by reading articles and speeches and how that has caused you to take action in life. So I'm wondering your perspective on the power of words, how it causes all of us to take action.
Yeah, I really do find the written word compelling. Since I was in seventh grade, is when I gave my first speech, and I really became attracted to it at that point in life, that I could write this and present something that had an impact on someone else. And I enjoy reading, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, short stories, newspapers, anything. I like the imagery that occurs, and whether someone is giving a speech like I was in seventh grade, or it's something that I'm reading, it has to be written, and there has to be some imagery that paints a picture in someone's head. It's remarkable to me that someone can take black and white words and create a fantastical image in my mind. But the written word can also bring knowledge and understanding. We were just talking about equity in the workplace, and that can come about by reading about other people's lived experiences, something that might be drastically different from your own. While you can never be in another person's shoes and truly understand what they've gone through, by reading their experiences, you can have empathy for their way and what has led them to this particular point in life. The written word can do that. The written word can give you perspective. It can give you a glimpse into someone else's lived experience, something that can shape you and your business in a positive way. Most business owners want to grow, they want to expand, they want to be more profitable. Growing your business requires growing yourself. You do that by engaging with different perspectives through diversity in the workforce.
And Brian, I just want to go back to the Brian Flores situation for just a second, and the evolution or lack thereof of the Rooney Rule. You know, the NFL put the rule in several years ago to try and avoid something like this. So obviously there hasn't been much progress with only one African American head coach now in Mike Conlon in the NFL. So how do you think the NFL can address the problem that they're having with diversity specifically?
So I think that's a great point, because part of what I haven't read a whole lot, but I read a couple of articles last night as the news broke about the Flores lawsuit. That what he's alleging is that he did go on interviews, which, as you referenced, is part of the Rooney Rule, that minorities have to be interviewed for head coaching positions and for managerial positions. But that I forget the exact language used that Coach Flores used, but it was something to the effect of that the interviews he went on were just shams. That the teams he interviewed with had already made up their mind that they were going with someone else, and they chose to interview him because they needed to interview an African American coach. So I think it's more systemic. I think they have some of the right policies in place, but the NFL still clearly has a problem with promoting and holding on to diversity and inclusion off the field. I mean, you look at the players on the field, and the vast majority of players are African American, but the coaching staff is very much not. So I think it comes back down to, again, the processes, the structure are sort of in place, but it's a lot of the act that's happening that is not being done with transparency, with honesty, with any sense of genuineness toward the policies that have been put in place. It's almost like the policies that the NFL has put in place are more of a facade.
Actions speak louder than words, absolutely. And Ryan, tell me, I'm curious to get your thoughts of any human resources professionals or business people who may be watching or listening to this podcast. What pieces of advice would you give them in terms of establishing a more equitable and a diverse workforce? How would you advise someone that wants to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion, but doesn't know where to start? I'm curious.
Sure. So I'd say a couple things on that. First of all, patience. Going back to the light switch, it's not going to flip overnight. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to slowly get brighter. But also have a plan. Don't wing it. Create a structured plan of attack. Think about questions like, how are you going to work? How are you going to make your workplace more inclusive? If you don't have a plan, you don't know where you're going. It's again, like sports, Kevin. If one player leaves the huddle not knowing the play or thinking that you're running a different play, everything gets messed up. Players can run into each other. People have to figure it out as they go, and that rarely works out. You never get where you want to go. Finally, like we were just discussing with the Bryan Flores and the NFL situation, be genuine. If you're one of those business owners that only cares about profits, that will be clear to your employees and probably your customers and clients as well. Diversity will only be a facade, like I said, about the NFL, and it won't work for long. Business owners truly need to believe in diversity in the workplace, just like they need to truly believe in the work they're doing in order to be successful. And without that sense of genuineness, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, following up on that, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on the whole notion of the phrase representation matters. What do you think that means when we put it into a human resources or workplace culture perspective?
From my perspective, the representation matters goes back to the lived experiences. So everybody has a different lived experience. Everybody comes to the table with something different. And if we're excluding someone who can be representative of a group of people who have a different lived experience than everyone else already at the table, then that excludes that entire lived experience of that particular group of people from the discussion. And so that's where the representation comes from. You have to have somebody with that experience. And of course, even within groups, it's not to say that everybody in the same group is going to have the same lived experience. They won't, but they will be more similar than maybe the lived experiences that you and I have had, for example. Uh, our lived experiences have probably been very different. So that would make sense for people like both of us to be at the table to make sure that both the backgrounds from both of our lived experiences are there and represented.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian, tell me, I'm curious, how do you think the HR practices have gotten better, say, within the next last 3 to 5 years? And where do you think there are still gaps that we're still working to close when it comes to HR compliance and workplace culture?
So I think there's definitely still gaps to be filled, as we were just talking in the representation area, the diversity, the inclusion. I think the Supreme Court here in the United States is a great example of that. It looks like we're about to have the first African American female on the bench, and it's sort of been a long time coming. Again, not having that perspective, that lived at the table, has been missing on the bench. So I think that's something that is important to have, and I think that's a massive gap that across the board we're still seeing here. But I also think over the past 3 to 5 years, and specifically the last 2 years with the pandemic, HR practices have become more employee centric. Don't get me wrong, there's still a long way to go, but it's moving in the right directions. Unions could certainly help speed up this process and provide more representation, but we are definitely moving in the right direction. For a long time, HR as a whole, and I don't mean to say individual team members because there are many who have been preaching this concept for a long time, but HR itself as a business concept, as a department in a company, has been too focused on what's best for the company and not realized that what's best for employees is usually also best for the business. And that's where I think we've seen some recent shifts. Workers have been able to use some of that leverage to push some workplace changes, which ultimately benefits their employer as well as them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian, I know that you live in the city of beautiful Orlando, and certainly before the border closed, I view Orlando as my second home. Just love it down there, buddy. As I shared with you before this started, we're experiencing a massive snowstorm on this side of the border, buddy. So I'm a little bit jealous that it's 80 degrees and sunny down there in Orlando. But tell me, for you, what's the best part about living in the city of beautiful, buddy? I'm curious.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Kevin. No snow. I grew up in the Midwest, and I got tired of the snow and the cold. Now I get to enjoy the sunshine most of the year, walking outside without a coat. Although the past week has been quite chilly, I will admit I've had the heat on several nights. So that is a great benefit of living here in Central Florida. But I would also say more than that, Orlando is its own city that's grown and kind of redefined itself in the time that I've been here. When I first moved here nearly 20 years ago, it was a little more than a sprawling suburbia, sort of propped up by Disney and some of the theme parks. But now there's a vibrant quality of life here. There's still some big city challenges. There's a long way to go, and Florida does get its share of negative coverage, rightfully so. But here in Orlando, most people are very open and ready to embrace the differences of their neighbors.
Yeah, one of the things that I truly enjoy about Orlando is the diversity of things to do beyond the theme parks. I'm a huge fan of the Dr. Phillips Performing Center down there. There's so many beautiful natural resources down there in Florida. So there is more. There is more to do than just to go see Mickey Mouse, for sure. Absolutely.
Yes, there definitely is.
And Bryan, tell me finally, if you had to define your personal or professional legacy, how do you think you would want that to be defined?
Um, so I guess I'd start by saying that I've been privileged and blessed in my life. I think that ultimately for looking at my legacy, I would want to have had a positive impact and contribution to progress that makes someone else's life just a little bit better, even just one person. We think of this massive planet on a macro scale often, but we don't think about the micro level, making life better for our neighbors. So I guess that's where I'd land on my legacy, having even a small contribution to making someone else's life better, more livable. I would consider my own life one well lived.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, tell me if people want to get connected with you, buddy, what's the best way they can do that?
Best way to do that is to go to my website and use the contact button to get in touch with me. My website is bryanjdriscoll.com. My first name is Bryan, Bryan. So that's bryanjdriscoll.com. It's the best place to find me.
Fantastic. Well, Bryan, I really enjoyed our conversation about human resources diversification, equity, diversity, and equality. Your work in the space and time on my behalf is most appreciated, buddy. And I want to thank you for being here this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I greatly enjoyed the discussion.